let's let them all admit all. We have about, we had 60 something people register, Kevin. So
Oh my.
yeah, but we always have about a third drop off, and I think we would even have more if the weather wasn't, if the light wasn't, because it seems like it's 5 o'clock now. We used to meet in the dark,
Yeah.
and now it's broad daylight here now. So
Yeah.
But they're out walking about, Kevin.
Yeah.
all right,
Good.
so,
Good. I'm glad they're doing that.
Right.
yeah, so we'll be doing this. So I wonder if we should, I think what the best way to do this, Karen, with questioning and such is that if someone types their name into the question box,
The chat.
ask the chat box, and then we can
Yeah.
ask that we can address them directly to unmute and then ask their
Yes.
question verbally. I think that might be easier.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, so we're still going to be admitting some. Yeah, 31
Wow.
so far.
What a big group you have.
Oh, we usually have around, well, I think it's the weather that's getting better. Normally about 100 people register.
Oh, wow.
They were in lockdown then, though, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're looking for anything to entertain themselves.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we have one message.
Our little American Pilgrim group here in Spokane is pretty small.
Yeah, I think we're the largest. I think we're the largest in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So Nancy, I just want to let you know, I can't see anything in the waiting room. Is that how it's supposed to
Oh,
be?
now there is. Oh, I have to make you a co-host, Karen. Hold on one second. No, let me get you to Karen. Admit all. Oh, see, this is why I should have done this right away. Participants.
But it's okay if Kevin's speaking and you bring them all in, but.
Wait, hold on. I'm getting you. Let's see more. Make co-host. There you go. You're the co-host.
Cool.
All right. So, and so can you, oh, the recording, I already started the recording. There you go. Crazy me. All right. So we have 35 in. Let a few more. Well, it's 7:05. You keep an eye on that, huh, Karen?
Well, yeah, I'll let them all in if I,
yeah. All right, because they'll ding anyway. So, welcome everyone. Great to see your faces. That handsome fellow who's in my top left, that's Father Kevin Codd. He's been very gracious to accept our invitation to talk about his one book I really want him to talk about is the one that I got to read. I had to admit that I didn't get to read a second one, but To the Field of Stars, and the other one is Beyond the Field of Stars, Beyond Even the Field of Stars. So it's just, we're going to have a conversation. So what I thought, if some of you might have heard me say that we would, if you have a question for Kevin, just type your name in the chat box, and then when we see it pop up, we'll call your name, and then we'll just ask you to unmute your microphone. And as usually, we ask you to keep your microphone muted, because if you're like my house, there's doorbell ringings and kids coming in, not older kids coming in the door saying, "Mom, are you here?" That kind of way. I don't have dogs, but I've heard them on other Zoom calls. So that would be great. So Kevin Codd, I read his book. I couldn't tell you when, 6 years ago, I'm guessing. Absolutely loved it. And as Karen said, it resonated with her as well. I have all these notes. I don't know if I'll get to all of them because I actually went and skimmed, reread it. No, more than skimmed it. But there's somebody dinging on me. I'm sorry. Too many bells and whistles. So Kevin walked in 2008, correct?
Yes, I believe that's right.
While he was living in Louvain in Belgium. But you know what? Why don't I let you do your own intro so I don't butcher it? How's that?
Okay. Well, nice to meet you all. I can see some of your faces, not all of you. I've never had this big a group before, so I'm kind of watching the screen here as people appear and disappear. But yes, I'm a native of Spokane, Washington here. go back several generations here on my dad's side, you know, to eventually to the Ireland and all that stuff, but that's a long time ago. Been a priest for 40, almost 43 years. I had the wonderful opportunity to work in Belgium, in Leuven, Belgium for 8 years. I was also a student there as a seminarian previously, so 12 years altogether. I saw somebody in the chat mention Father Francis Riley. He was one of my classmates. He's in Springfield, I think, Springfield, Mass. But so while I was there, my mom was aging here in Spokane, and I would, whenever I had free time, I would head home to be with her in her old age. And but then once she passed away, that sort of left my next summer free, and what am I going to do with myself? And I think I mentioned this in the book. And so that was, I don't even know where I had heard about this Camino thing, this pilgrimage, and that popped in my head as one of those little inspiration moments or something that, well, I should do that. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I think that's probably common to many of us. After I did it, it took a while to process it. And part of that processing after some months was, I need to write some of this down because I'm starting to forget the details. I'm starting to forget the feelings and I had this huge experience and it's slipping away. So I had kept a journal, and when I reopened it and started reading it, I was amazed at how little was actually in it. So that kind of pushed me to try to recall the details, and the best way to do that was writing. My intention wasn't to write a book, it was just sort of to try and tell this story for myself. And then after I got a ways into it, I thought this could be a book, I guess, so once I finished that, I started passing the text around to some friends, and they liked it, and which sort of surprised me. And in some cases made some nice suggestions, like, ditch the past tense and write it in the present tense. And I said, oh, that's an idea. So that meant going through the whole thing and changing all the was's to is's and everything. And some other nice things. A priest friend of mine who at the time was considerably older than me, kind of from a generation or 2 generations ahead of me, had a couple of swear words in there, and he said, these are not worthy of you. Get rid of the swear words. I said, oh, do I have to? He said, yes, you have to. So I got rid of the swear words. They were nothing bad, just an occasional hell and damn and stuff like that. So then, getting it printed, getting it published, finding a publisher took a couple of years, and finally Erdmann's caught it and published it, and the rest is history. My expectation was that it would sell, I don't know, a few hundred copies, 1,000 copies, who knows? It's done much better than that.
Yeah, how many copies, Kevin?
I think maybe about 15,000, somewhere in there.
Excellent. Your writing style, for those of you out there who have yet to read it, it's so descriptive. It's light yet heavy. It's inviting. It is enlightening, because it's decidedly a Christian book. But because I think, in my perspective, but anyone can read it if you will. And what I love about it is how you explain all these traditions of the Camino, because the Camino is intrinsically not intrinsically, but originally a Catholic pilgrimage, or a Christian one, then Catholic. But you explain all these traditions, whether it's pilgrimage, confession, prayer, the reverence to our mother, all these things along the way, you describe in such a wonderful way to someone who is not Catholic, is not Christian. And it's also very inviting and not put offish, and very much from the heart. So that's why I think it's sort of a universal book for someone who's walking this particular this pilgrimage, if you will. We do have the first question if you want to field one, Kevin.
Sure.
I don't know if you can see the chat box, but it's from Meg. Meg, I'll read it for you, but if you want to say it on your own, you can. Okay, so thanks for this opportunity. It's Meg Holmes. She was my former co-chair, Kevin. And she said in your book, you seem to be bemused by both pilgrims who realized you were a priest and those who are surprised when they find out. And you did not walk outwardly as a priest, but did not deny it when asked. Could you discuss more your reasons for this choice? And a second question is, I share, and I agree with you, Meg, I share the same thing, conflicting thoughts about Santiago as pilgrim and as Matamoros, as the Moor slayer. Have your thoughts evolved since you wrote this first book?
Gosh, let's see where to begin, Meg. Thanks, good questions. Yeah, you know, the choice, it wasn't a conscious choice, you know, well, I'm gonna go, I think it just seemed a natural thing for me. This was an experience that I kind of saw as not as a, well, the starting saw it as sort of a break or a vacation or something. So I, you know, it's like when you know, I didn't go out as a work assignment. It was a personal thing for me. So it was not a real choice. I just, when you start meeting people, especially on the Camino, I think maybe you've had that experience. You don't ask a lot of questions about, you know, you ask for first names and then, you know, kind of where you're from. And not too often, at least in my experience now, all these years ago, did we ask about jobs or work. Most of the time, it was just sort of that wasn't important in knowing the other person. So it was not, you know, it wasn't an explicit choice. I'm going to do it this way and not that way. It was just the way it sort of happened. Because I think for me, it was a break from work. It was a break from, and you know, I know, you know, some priests or clergy have gone, you know, even dressed in, you know, cassocks or soutanes and things like that. And I guess that for them, that's then it becomes a ministry rather than just an experience. It was, for me, it didn't start out as a ministry. I think it ended up that way. So I don't know if that answers your question on that part, Meg. You know, when I was walking through France, I had one experience where I stayed overnight with this lovely older couple, and she looked at me as she was, you know, snapping peas or something, getting ready for dinner, and she said, "You're a priest, aren't you?" You know, "Pret." And I said, "Yes, how did you know?" She says, "I don't know, you just seem like one." I wasn't sure how to take that.
It happened a lot.
Yeah.
I wondered why in the book, you were surprised at both the people who said, "Oh, you're a priest, aren't you?" and those who seemed to say, "What? You're a priest?"
Yeah.
Both ways. And then you also have the third thread of you earn this reputation as you go along, and people can, you know, say, "Oh, you're the priest."
Yeah.
You seem to have strange reaction, bemused reaction, confused reaction, like, I don't know what to think of all this.
Yeah.
It seems to be the same reactions all the time, no matter which way it goes.
Yeah. I think part of it was it's always a surprise to me when people wonder why you're normal. You know, it's like there's being a priest over here is kind of abnormal, and being a normal person, it's don't really go together or something. And I'm like, well, you know, for me, it's, you know, I don't experience that way. It's so I don't feel like it's abnormal, I guess, or and maybe in Europe it is a little bit more than, I don't know, who knows. I thought part of the ministry was just being a human being out there, and being a human being in particular of, you know, faith, and who kind of was experiencing this with the people. And for me, it was, you know, they ministered to me as much as I did to any of them. I mean, they washed my feet and, you know, massaged my sore calves, and visited me and held me up on my dark, you know, discouraged days. And but I think the experience with Tony, who appears, I guess, maybe the last third of the book, who I'm still very good friends with, the Galician young man.
Oh, yeah.
You know, my experience with him was it started out as just sort of a relationship, and then as things went on, as we got to know each other, and it deepened into a little bit more than that in terms of sort of a spiritual conversation that we had as we walked along. It was really nice, and we've stayed really good friends through the years. He now has, you know, a wife, 2 children, and who are beautiful kids, and so yeah, bemused is, I guess, kind of a good word, because I guess it always seems funny for me to have that sort of distinction that somehow being a human being is separate from being a priest or a pastor. Does that make sense, Meg?
Yeah.
The Moor Slayer thing, no, I still dislike that. I see, occasionally you see that same image in, you know, Mexico or someplace, and it's, yeah, the pilgrim image that's my St. James. For obvious reasons, I think, you know, that Moor Slayer thing, the Matamoros, comes out of the whole reconquest of Spain and pushing the Moorish populations out. They had lived together in peace for hundreds of years, and then Isabella and Ferdinand decided enough was enough or something. I don't know all that history there. It was a bloody and awful thing. So
there was a lot of greed involved on both sides. And it's just like it's another case study in humanity, I think, you know, in many ways.
Yeah.
Does any next question, anyone?
Kevin, I actually have one, because one of the things I love, that I highlighted in your book, that I loved, that resonates with me, is that, you know, the whole idea about the Camino, and why do you go there, and why do people, you know, embark on this amazing journey? And I love your, I think it's in the foreword, but it says there was one important difference between the legends associated with Santiago and other more fanciful tales like the Grimm brothers and things like, and Tolkien, but there was an historical person at the bottom of the story. Even after setting aside the myth and the storytelling, there was a real St. James. And this James actually lived, loved, served, cared, failed, hurt, and died. Even in these modern times, Christians can still believe in life after death. And so the sentiments that our beloved dead are still part of the family. I mean, I highlighted that. It's like that spoke to me and resonated to me about why I want the Camino as many times as I did, because and this Camino, I have to say the real Camino to St. James, the Apostle, is why I do that. I've done it 5 times. And I loved how you captured that whole thing.
Thank you. There was another passage somewhere midway through where I kind of talked about the motivation too. I think I'd have to try and find it, and I don't have it marked into my copy here. But yeah, I think part of the motivation for telling this tale and getting it published eventually was the desire to keep the Camino from getting too detached from its religious roots. You know, it can easily kind of become just sort of a thing. You know, it's maybe a new agey sort of thing, or a power thing, or and the vocabulary that we have, that I have at least as Christians, in terms of sort of grace, providence, and vocation, can kind of easily drift away from it. It just becomes a pull, or inclination or a coincidence. And so part of I think my motivation was to put, keep the religious words in the story, in the experience for people if they want them. If they want to talk about it in terms of, other traditions and stuff, that's fine. But I think the Christian Catholic experience of it, as it developed, is important not to lose, at least not to lose completely. That, I think that expresses itself sometimes in, the expressions we hear. Well, the Camino will tell you, the Camino will guide you, the Camino will lead you, the Camino provides. Those are nice, but that's not the way they talked in 1200.
Right, right.
Well, that's an interesting segue into Dave's question. How would you compare walking the Camino versus what you have heard about the Appalachian Trail?
I stepped on the Appalachian Trail. I was back in South Carolina visiting my brother a few years back, and we crossed paths of the Appalachian Trail somewhere. I don't know that experience. I think we have the same. We have a Pacific Crest Trail on this side of the country that goes from Mexico to Canada. I think those are maybe experiences of self-discovery as well, but I think lacking that. I don't think they're pilgrimages. I think because a pilgrimage, I think, has to have an endpoint that's meaningful. An endpoint that says, okay, in the pilgrimage tradition, you've got the holy city at the end, whether it's Jerusalem, Rome, Santiago, or some other place, Canterbury. And those holy cities are places where there's some spiritual experience that's rooted there, that's common to us. I think walking, I don't know because I've never done that, but I think walking the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail is a physical endurance thing or a psychological thing, and maybe eventually becomes sort of a spiritual thing as self-reflection takes place out there.
And if I could just jump in here, when I walked my second Camino, Portugal, I walked with another American I didn't walk with him because he walked way too fast. He was younger and all that. But I spent a night in a room with him, and he was from Texas or something like that. And he talked to me about, and I'll never forget this because he said, I knocked down the Pacific Coast Trail, and then I knocked down the Appalachian Trail. Now I got to knock down the Camino. And I was kind of like, whoa,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, that resonated with me. I'll never forget that he said that, because and then he walked off and he was all in shape and all, prancing around, stuff like that in the Galbergues in the evening. It's like, okay, whatever. He didn't really get the whole, what I just read, and it wasn't about that. It was what you're saying. I mean, knocking down these challenges, if you will.
So again, a great segue, Karen, because Marin Nelson writes in, I've only just ordered your book and haven't had time to read much. Can you talk about the route, the train, the physical challenges, those hard or dark times?
Yeah, I think anybody that's walked it can share on that. The most common route is what they call the French Way, or that starts in France at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. It's the one that's portrayed in the movie The Way with Martin Sheen. It crosses not the most northern part of Spain, but kind of through and you start up in the Pyrenees, and then you head down, and then you cross what they call the Meseta, which is this long expanse of flat wheat land, I guess. That's a long straight routes, just that can be really challenging for people, especially if it's hot. Then you eventually get closer to the coast, and it turns damp and rainy and more coastal weather, of course, in Galicia. It's I think for most people our age, my age anyway, or in their 50s and 60s, it's probably at least a month walk if you start in France, work your way across. There's all kinds of variations though. There's a northern route that follows the coast up further north. There's routes from all over. There's that come from Sevilla, that come from down south, that come up through Portugal. And that's just the part in, Spain and Portugal. Then there's the routes that crisscross, that are kind of ribbon their way across all of Europe. In my case, the second walk I did started in Belgium, came down through France. There's also the Le Puy route through France before you get to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. And so there's, people say, well, where are you supposed to begin? You begin wherever you want to begin. You can begin in Russia if you want and follow routes, the medieval routes through. A lot of Germans, a lot of Dutch people, Belgians walk from their homes, and the routes begin at their doorstep, which is what I tried to do in my second walk in the second book, which is Beyond Even the Stars. And so it's as it wears you down physically. Almost everybody, unless they're a super walker like this fellow that Karen was talking about, it wears you down physically, psychologically. It kind of roughs you up a little bit, but that's part of the process of kind of having your spirit, confronting yourself, confronting your own spirit, having, that a lot of people, have their first good cry maybe 2 or 3 weeks in. you just stop somewhere and something touches you and you start bawling. It's like, where did that come from? Why are you crying? Are you, I don't know, I'm just crying. That's kind of a little bit of a description of it. Others can add to it as you talk more.
Naren, did that answer you? Because I saw you had a follow-up about the French portion.
Yeah, I should have been a little more specific in my question. So I have walked the French route, and I've walked the Portuguese coastal route.
Oh.
And I am eagerly awaiting for things to open up so I can do my next one. And I'm really interested in the Belgian and other part of France that you walked, because I'm choosing which my next route is going to be.
Yeah,
I was cracking up because I'm like, I thought she already walked, but so.
I'm sorry.
I just wasn't specific. I wasn't specific.
I'm sorry.
But you provided a great segue again for Dan Peterson's question. Kevin, what was the driving decision to walk from Leuven, Belgium to Santiago, a much longer Camino, on your second Camino, when you experienced physical problems on your first Camino? By the way, I'm reading Beyond Even the Stars now, and I love it.
No, thank you.
Thanks,
Dan. Do I see Dan here somewhere? Let's see.
Yeah, he was live in
Oh,
person.
I see I see his name. So I think the initial experience was when I was walking in Spain, coming across the occasional pilgrim who had walked all the way from there he is. Hi, Dan.
Hi
Who
there.
had walked all the way from Holland, Netherlands, or Germany or someplace. And I thought that was just amazing. I was having so much trouble just doing Spain, and to think that they had walked a couple thousand, 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles or something was amazing to me. But it was later on that it kind of touched me. I was back home, had been home, and felt that call, and it was sort of like, it fit my timeline in terms of finishing my work in Louvain. And I thought, well, this is a good way to end my time in Europe, is to see if I can walk the whole thing. And so that route, at the time, there was no mapped route from Leuven as far as Namur. So I had to make that one up. Now they have some guidebooks for that area. So I was just walking on my own. And then from Namur on, there was they call it GR route, which is a formal government sort of sponsored trail for trekkers that took me south. It wasn't a specific pilgrimage route. I didn't hit a, you know, it was sort of a touristic or trekkers route, which was real irritating sometimes because it would send you, you know, send you up a mountain to see a lake. It's like, then back down. It's like, I just want to get from this town to the next town. And, but then once I got to Vézelay, which is a beautiful, so I went through, came down into France, stopped in Reims or Reims, we would say in American English, worked my way south to Vézelay, not without some difficulties and delays, but, and then from Vézelay, I had a actual pilgrim guide that gave you know, the actual more pilgrimy route through south as far as Bordeaux. And in Bordeaux, I had to stop because I got plantar fasciitis and I couldn't walk anymore. So I finished it. Well, I don't want to give away the story, but if you're reading the book, the second book, you'll catch up to me there. So again, it was sort of like that, you know, it came back, that bug came back, and you know, that call, that longing or something. And the second experience was very different. Getting back to Marin's question, it's a very different experience. The solitude, you're not walking with other pilgrims except on rare occasions. So you're walking on your own. So you don't have that support system of the other pilgrims kind of encouraging you. You've got to do it on your own. And the solitude is much deeper. It gives you a lot more time for thinking deep thoughts and pondering, you know, deep ponderings. And then when you do have an occasional pilgrim that you catch up to, or they catch up to you, it's a much more special experience to actually encounter another pilgrim along the way. But on the other hand, you know they're there because in all the little guest books, they call it in France, the livre d'or, you see that, you know, there's pilgrims ahead of you, and people behind you are coming up. I had one experience where I heard my name being called from behind me. I was just walking along, minding my own business, and a lady rides up on a bicycle, obviously, you know, packed with a bicycle pilgrim, and she says, "Are you Kevin Codd from Spokane?" And I said, "Yes." I was completely befuddled. And she said, "Oh, I've been seeing your name in the books, in the guest books, for days now. And I just wanted so much to meet you because I know Spokane. My son went to school at Gonzaga, and I've been there, and here we are." So we chatted for 15, 20 minutes, and then off she rode. So
Did you ever get to see her again?
no.
The bicycle.
You see, that's what happens on the Camino.
Yeah.
I mean, there's these things you hope you do, but I mean, she's on a bike, you're on foot. So, you know, but it's these momentary things that stay in your heart.
Yeah.
Moments of grace often, you know.
Yeah.
Marianne, oh, sorry, Dan, are you still there? Do you want to ask any follow-ups or anything? He's not in my screen anymore, so.
Here's Marianne. I'm reading it here.
Okay.
"Into the field of stars you write, that is exactly what I am coming to understand on this road, like the star above me, seen or unseen. He is here, felt or unfelt. He's with me, attended to or not attended to, he's walking with me." Could you talk a little bit more about experiencing God's presence on the Camino? Yeah, gosh, well, you know, this, as a person of faith, I think you come into this kind of prepped for that kind of experience, or sensitivity or sensibility, because it's who you are. It's been who you are most of your life, if not all of it. But I think the experience of walking and getting into it amplifies that and maybe deepens that sense not always, because there's many days where you really feel like there ain't no God out there. It's kind of like, I hurt and how come? And but then you have these moments where it's really feels like you are not alone, and that this is part of a bigger picture, and that you're walking someplace important, and that's not just a town at the end of the road. In the experience of walking through France, I did not have, for the first maybe month of walking, it was a dry experience spiritually in some ways. And then all of a sudden, I just got a blast. I don't, again, you have to kind of read the book, I guess, but kind of one of those ecstatic moments that you don't even know it's coming, it just happens. And the word ecstasy is to stand outside of yourself, where you're just lifted out of, where all of a sudden, for a second, for a moment, you're just bang, it's like, okay, now I get it. And I treasure that moment and others like it. But I don't think, you can't prepare for it. You can't make it happen. You can't conjure it up. It just happens when it happens, if it's going to happen at all. I always felt really graced and privileged that I had some of those moments along the way, in Spain as well as in France. But
So-
you can't conjure them up, they just happen.
Well, you touch upon that when you talk about, we always call it the organic formation of a Camino family, but when you walk as a person of faith, let's say, you're still astonished because, as you say, you how can this all be that we all come together like this? It has to be part of a greater plan.
Yeah. I know there are people who walk it with absolutely no religious or spiritual inclinations or desires. It's a physical experience or an athletic experience or a cultural experience. And that, I think that's fine and that's great. Me being me, that wasn't possible to experience it that way. But I think for me, what that happens then is that gives me a template for the rest of my life. Okay, this is what happened in that month or in that couple of months, is what is really happening across the span of my life. This intense experience is actually what my whole life is, and these moments and these encounters and are the same thing that I'm actually experiencing here if I'm tuned into it and aware of it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin, I have to, because your book, I have to add to that because it spoke to me so, it spoke to my heart, I have to say. But one of the things when you were you were in the Pyrenees, and you go so high, and there's no trees, there's no this, there's no that. And you said, I have walked myself into another world, a world very distinct from that which I knew down below. And you do feel that way. Then you say a world somewhere between earth and heaven that feels like nowhere and elsewhere. And then you also say, it's like being with Moses on the top of Old Sinai, or with Jesus on the Mount of Tabor, which St. James is with him as well. This may be the closest I will get in my life to a mystical experience. That blew me away because you verbalized what I felt. I walked alone. I was not with anybody else. You verbalized what I felt on the Pyrenees. It's an amazing experience. And I didn't know how to verbalize it, but you did it. It was wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
A light question here from Carol Fogarty. She says, what's your connection to Gonzaga? I graduated from there in 1980. Now you've dated yourself, Carol, for all the world to see.
I graduated from there in 1975. So, so yeah, I'm a Zag.
Go Zags.
Go Zags. What a year we had. What a disappointing end, though.
Oh, as I said to you when I was emailing you, I was like, we were disappointed here in this town too, you know.
Yeah.
Linnea Hendrickson, I was very moved by the second book and your experiences in France. It is much different on some of the less traveled chemin, where I often met no one for hours at a time. You were so open about your vulnerability in the second book, which she happened to read first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think not having characters, it made the second book very difficult to write because I didn't have a whole host of characters. It was, you know, sort of a, you know, the Spanish experience was sort of like, you know, Arrested Development or something. You had all these characters sort of passing through your life. Whereas in France, you didn't have that. And so how do you tell this story without all of these interesting, sometimes problematic characters passing through you that are passing through your life? And I think we had the same experience, Linnea, that, you know, that those less traveled routes are in some ways harder, but also more profound and more beautiful. And you know, writing that book was like, if I have to write another day about the dew on the spider webs, you know, so how do you tell the story when it's just you out there? Was really problematic for me, hard. It took a lot longer to write the second book.
I think you did a great job with that. It was a very moving book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I had something I wanted to ask you about actually.
Sure.
Now you walked the first, so 2008 and then 2000. Well, when did you walk from Louvain? What year was that? You published in 2018.
Yeah, it was, let's see. Well, that was about 2008 when I walked France, but because it took that long to get the first book published. So it was published, the Camino, the first one was, I actually had walked it some years before the book actually came out. The book came out in 2008.
Right.
In fact, at the end of, I was still working on kind of the galley sheets for this as I finished France. So it was about 2008 when I walked through France as well.
Well, Marnie Reynolds says the synopsis of your book states that you first walked in 2003, well before the Camino became so popular. It must have been a very different experience than people experience now. And did you read any books ahead of time? I
read one book ahead of time. I got it on my shelf. I forget. It was a professor from somewhere in Pennsylvania, I think. I could go look at it. I only read one book prior to my own walking, and I kind of, once I decided to do it, I didn't want to read too much more because I just wanted to see what my experience would be. And it was a different experience. There were very few, as you know, I've met very few Americans along the way. Americans hadn't discovered it yet. There were some Canadians, a fair number of Australians, the rest were Europeans. And I understand, you know, obviously that has dramatically changed. When I walked the first time in 2003, you know, there were like maybe 75,000 Compostelas given out that year. And now it's what, 400,000, 500,000 a year.
Nearly 400.
Yeah. So it was not nearly so populated. Infrastructure was not as developed. And I had someone here in Spokane who just had walked before COVID shut everything down. And she told me, you know, the experience you had, we did not have. It was a very different experience because there were so many people along the way. We had to fight for solitude and for, you know, time alone,
Really?
which was, I'm not sure I'd want to go back and walk again through the French way again.
Well, it is
If I-
avoidable if you, depending on what time of year you go and how
Yeah.
you walk and not walk on the stages and such, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
But Kevin, so there was one line in from your original book that I highlighted because I really liked it. And you said that you did nothing more to prepare yourself for the trip except buy equipment. And I thought that was so, I mean, I love that because, you know, you thought I'm going to take this, I'm going to buy the hiking poles, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to buy that, but never really thinking about, okay, what about, you know, strapping on you bought this huge backpack, which was way too heavy for you. And I just loved reading about how you did that. And then as you were walking, the first day, and then, you know, as we all go through that, and you're throwing everything out of the backpack. I don't need this, I don't need that. And you talked about the Coleman,
thermos,
Thermos.
the bloody
it's
thermos.
so
That's
heavy.
stupid. It was a symbol, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Of
it's a great
Yes,
one. Yeah.
right.
holding
Well,
on to useless stuff.
Yeah.
Was.
When I first walked in 2010, there was only my cousins in Ireland had heard about it. My French friends, nobody, unless they were academics here in the States, had heard about it. And the only book I read was Jack Hitt's on the Road or something like that, which is what apparently Emilio Estevez used to write the screenplay for the movie The Way, because neither Martin or his son never walked the Camino. So
Yep.
he used Jack Hitt's book. But again, like I left my house, and this is just a tip for anyone on here who hasn't walked yet, weigh your pack before you leave, because I got to Logan Airport and my pack weighed 15 kilos. And I got to San Jean, I was like, oh my God. No, I got to Roncesvalles and I started dumping things. I had a book this big. I didn't have a thermos though. I think you take the cake for that one.
You do, Kevin. I
Yeah.
thought that was so interesting that, yeah, you had this, and how often do you do that? Like it's on sale. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna, you know, the Coleman, and you didn't want to throw them out
Mhm.
because, you know, it was, but way too heavy, way too heavy.
Yeah.
I also loved your story in the book about you having the camelback and it wasn't attached just right, and then all of your stuff got wet.
Yeah.
Which is huge on the Camino.
Yeah.
I mean, if all the stuff in your pack gets wet, what do you do?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another challenge that
You talk about considering when you walked, Alfredo and Tony, because these are two guys that he meets on the Camino that are anti-Americans. And, you know, this is just after Bush has invaded Iraq, you know, and I could only imagine some of the conversations that might, you know, if you were walking during the Trump era, you know, so
Right.
about those two fellows, do you think I would assume you changed, well, you definitely changed, you know, Tony's heart about Americans, but
Yeah.
Alfredo, I don't know, he was.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. I would have to defer to somebody who walked during these last 4 years to see what that experience was like. I don't know, you know, I didn't have the luxury of hanging around with a bunch of Americans. And I don't know if that happens now or people congeal into kind of national groups or something, or whether they continue to intermingle and stuff. I think if you're not, you know, if people sense you're a kind of a real person and a real pilgrim, they don't really care that much. Whatever real pilgrim means, a real person. But you know, if they can relate to you, if you're not, you know, blowing off a bunch of political, you know, or you know, the classic ugly American stuff. You know, why can't I get a McDonald's burger in Gragnon? You know. I want my Big Mac, or political BS stuff. I think most people would be happy to, you know, I don't know. I presume it would be much the same in that respect. You would make friends among whomever. but maybe
I
you
have
have more
I have
experience than I do.
I have a thought on what you said. I think when you started your first Camino, you already had your faith and it was kind of solid, which is what led you to not read too much and to go without knowing much about it, because you already were prepared to with your faith solidly in place. I, on the other hand, would have said I had faith, but I really didn't discover what it was like to live on faith until about 3 or 4 days into the Camino, when I had all different hardships like lots of people have, and I learned that it's not enough to have faith. You really have to experience faith. And so I think it's interesting because I did the prep. I went my first Camino in 2015, and I went alone, and I really enjoyed all the people because that was a part of the journey for me, because I talked to people from Tanzania and I talked to people from China and I talked from all over the world, and it made me feel like this was a global, we were all unified regardless of where we were from. So I actually really enjoyed the people and would encourage, and I certainly wouldn't discourage people because my route was very different. It was populated by so many more people. However, on my third Camino, I'm looking forward to, I think it's going to be France, and I am looking forward to that solitary time. I had more solitary time in Portugal because it was the coastal route, which was much less traveled, and I went in the fall. But I absolutely loved my first Camino, although, as I said, I really learned to live and trust my faith after I was well on my way.
Yeah. Thank you. It's really nice.
And thank you, Maren, because I get at least, I don't know how many emails a month from, especially women. And it's not surprising. Is anyone leaving? I got one the other day. Is anyone going to be walking this year? I want to do it, and I don't want to be alone. I want to be with another American. And I try to tell people, and those of you who have walked, you can understand, like, you're never alone unless you choose to be alone, number one. And if you carry the spirit of the Camino within you, which means, and Kevin lays this out over and over in his first book, people are doing small acts of kindness, every day, over and over, this one, that one. Well, if you do likewise for others, you will immediately be surrounded by, as you talk about, like a communion of, of friends and family and whatever. And so I try to stress, please don't be dissuaded by walking alone, because your experience will be so rich, or maybe even richer for it. So thanks, Maren.
Yeah.
Kevin, if I could just add to that, just a little aside. I loved your piece about, because I walked my first Camino when I was 65 years old. But one of the things I did every morning in your book resonated with me is I said the rosary. And it was a great thing to do every day. It started, at the crack of dawn. I had to leave early because I found out after the first day that if you don't leave early, you have to get, I'm too old for a top bunk. So I need the bottom bunk. So I need to get there early. And so that's what I did. But every morning I had and I loved your the way you wrote in your book about the rosary. It gives you a pace, and it's just kind of like that. And you're doing this, and I found that so as a religious person and all of that it was so comforting to do that. And then most of the time I left in the dark, just so I could get a bed that was not in the top bunk. But anyway, I said the rosary and doing all that. So thank you, Kevin, for that was it's a wonderful, I think, a meditation, actually. When you're walking and you meditate, because walking is meditative. So if you can meditate on the rosary, it was a wonderful thing. Thank you.
So I walked in 2019. 19 years after I first learned about the Camino. And when I first learned about it, I always wanted to do it, but that was the first time I could. And I had just had my left foot rebuilt less than a year earlier. I was not even a year mobile when I left. And the couple that spoke and turned me on to the Camino back in 2000, they taught at URI, University of Rhode Island, and they wrote a book and they used to lead groups, and they stressed over and over again, go on your own. So I went on my own, and people were worried about my going solo. But for me, it was a meditation. And just as Nancy said, so many acts of kindness, helping me figure out how to put on my poncho, finding my glasses in the way. Like Karen, I left really early. I left in the dark. And I would usually buddy up with someone to leave the city or town, just so I would find the way out of town. But then I would walk on my own. And so many friends I would see over and over again at night, but it was very important for me to walk in silence, to
Susan,
experience the whole thing.
the couple that wrote the book, is that last name begin with a G, the fellow?
Linda Davidson and David Gitlitz.
That's the book I had to leave in Roncesvalles. I brought that flippin' book with me.
Oh, I never brought it with me.
Oh, no, you should have.
I bought it in 2000, Nancy, and I actually never read it. I was so I was so mesmerized by their performance, their speaking, and their slides. And
Yeah.
then I had them come and talk to my students a few years later, and that just confirmed me, yes, I want to do this.
Yeah.
But it took me 19 years.
Yeah, I
before
know.
was able
I
to-
learned about it when I was in graduate school in 1990, something like this. So
Yeah.
it took me a long time as well. But if for those of you who are into history, that book is fabulous.
Hmm.
And it is thick. Like, it is literally this. Do you know the book they're talking about, Kevin?
No, I don't.
It's a cultural guide, really, I think. And
It's
you go, if you've walked
very
it,
good.
you can go through the whole, the Frances anyways, and learn so much about the history and the traditions of the Camino.
So
from
what
that.
is it, Nancy? What's the name of the book?
I don't know, Karen. I
Oh.
dumped it in Roncesvalles. No, their names are very.
David Gitlitz and
Susan,
Linda
do you know?
Davidson or something.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry?
Anyway.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up now, and I'll.
Okay. put it
I
on-
think he's in poor health now.
I think he
But
died,
anyway, they
Susan.
were quite inspiring.
No, I think he passed away.
Oh, did he? That's
I
sad.
think I read that. Yeah. Oh, there's Meg. She's got it. Throw it up there, Meg.
Yep, here it is. The Pilgrim's Road to Santiago, the complete cultural handbook, including art, architecture,
Wow.
geology, history, folklore, saints' lives, flora and fauna. David M. Gitlitz, and he did pass away this year, I think,
Hmm.
and Linda K. Davidson.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Can
if
you imagine me bringing that in my backpack?
No,
I
that
probably
probably
weighs
that's a
imagine.
really
or
big
3
book.
pounds.
Wow.
Wow.
So
They're
it's Pilgrim's
both
Road to
Jewish.
Santiago, and then what?
Jewish, and they were married to other people, and they
So what are their
met
names?
on the Camino.
David Gitlitz.
Oh, okay. That's all I need. Yeah.
Hey, can I ask you to type
Yeah,
it
in the
I'll do
chat.
that. Hold on.
Yeah,
It's
thank
in
you.
the
I saw
chat.
it. Yeah, it's in
Okay,
the
I
great,
chat.
lost it.
great.
Yeah, hold
That'd
on.
be great. Thank
Okay.
you.
So,
Wow. Just the title alone is amazing.
oh yeah, it is an amazing book. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially what's in your pack going up and over. Anybody
imagine.
else for some questions or comments for?
I should say maybe that you probably don't know this, is that I went back a couple of years ago as a hospitalero in Grañón.
Oh, no, what year?
Well, pre-COVID, so
Oh,
time,
yeah.
my sense of time, I guess 3 years ago.
I
for
always
2
tell
weeks.
people to go to Grignon. So
Yeah, it was a great experience. And I, I stayed with the parish priest because but well, he was just a block away, as kind of my bed and stuff. But I basically lived over in the refuge. It was a wonderful experience because well, for a number of reasons. One was just the experience of being an hospitalero and welcoming people and cleaning up in the mornings and stuff. But it was funny when, I'd be in my grubbies and we'd have just finished, doing the bathrooms, and the pilgrims would start coming in, and you'd greet them and with a toilet brush in one hand. And then at 5 o'clock, some of them would wander over to the church for mass, and I would come out. And they were like, "Oh, you're the guy with the toilet brush." But I always we had the blessing at the pilgrims at the end, and that led to some lovely conversations. And the little reflection experience at night in the choir loft before people went to bed was really beautiful, night after night. And that was an experience where people obviously knew I was a priest once they saw me, in the sanctuary of the church. And the other thing that happened was that my book was there, and one guy from New Mexico, Martin, he took him a while to make the connection between me and the Kevin Cod on the book cover. But he'd read the book earlier, and he said, "Are you that Kevin?" Yeah, and we became good friends. But one night, this guy on a bicycle came through, and he stayed there. And in the reflection, he was very reserved. But in that reflection, when he got the candle, those of you who know that experience, he began talking, and he said, "I'm not a person of religion. I've never had anything to do with any religion. I've never believed in God. It's never been part of my life. But I found myself really dry out here and really empty and really lost." And he said, "But today I came across a crack in the road, and out of the crack were these yellow flowers growing where no flower should ever grow."
Mm.
And he said that, and then he just said, "So God, if you're there, help me flower," I think were the words he was speaking in
Beautiful.
Spanish. And that was so
Beautiful.
moving, it's like, yeah, great.
That is great.
Kevin, can
Thank
you,
Kevin,
for
for
those
sharing.
people who've never stayed in Grenon, why don't you describe Grenon for them? Because that, and
Yeah.
it's a little bit after Santo Domingo de la Calzada,
Yeah,
and that
it's
is
just,
Santos are the two wonderful gems, but if you would.
yeah. So it's this little village that's just maybe 6 miles from Santo Domingo. Further out, it's heading towards Burgos. And it's just a little village, all old people, almost no young people left in that little village anymore. But they have this beautiful church and a great refuge, and it's been going now for years. The parish has the refuge there, the refugio or the albergue, and they have some great traditions there, and somehow or other they're able to keep this. With every 2 weeks they change out the hospitaleros, and it's just an extraordinarily special place. You come in and it's the money box says, "Give what you can, take what you need." They prepare a common meal. Once the pilgrims have refreshed themselves, they come and help prepare the meal. And then at the meal, everybody, the Italians start singing and the Germans start singing and have a great time. And then after the meal, you have this nice kind of prayer experience up in the choir loft. It's a beautiful place.
That's Grignon.
Grignon, yeah.
Yep.
What you didn't say, Kevin, is from the pilgrim's perspective, particularly if it's a early May pilgrimage like mine was in 2015, It is a medieval tower with the pilgrim's bed down, and it's on the floor.
Yeah.
There are mats, I think, no heat. I wore all the clothes and everything I owned to bed that night. It
Mm.
was the coldest night I spent on the Camino. However, I never regretted that experience. It was a really special one because the hospitalera at that time was Barbara Zhang, who was a member of this Boston chapter.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I had met her through the Boston chapter. She was the hospitalera then. And when we went through, it was like the middle of the day. She was not there. It was a day off. So what we thought was, well, we dropped in, but when we found out it was a day off, we just told the other hospitalera, tell her that, we've come by from Boston
Mhm.
to Grandyon to say hello, right? And the other hospitalera, who was a young woman from Germany, said, no, you cannot go on. You have to stay here. You will not
Mhm.
regret it. You will never forget the experience. And she was right. It was a wonderful, moving
Yeah.
experience, right up to the mats on the floor in the freezing stone
Yeah.
medieval tower.
I last year I was before COVID. Well, I was planning to go back. The pastor there, the priest, died the year before, and I was going to go back and take his place for some weeks, a month or something, and help with the refuge as well. But then COVID hit, and that ended that plan, sadly.
Kevin, Joy Davis, she writes, my husband and I read your books. We read the first one before we began our Camino Francis in 2017. And the second one after we completed it in 2019. They did it, the Camino, in stages.
Mm-hmm.
For us as practicing Catholics, your book was our absolute favorite. Your faith and humor inspired us. One of our frustrations on the Camino was the lack of daily mass when we stayed in smaller towns. Did you celebrate mass for pilgrims when it wasn't available in smaller towns? Also, you mentioned tonight that you didn't start out planning on doing ministry on the Camino, but ended up ministering. This was my experience, as well as an Ignatian-trained spiritual director who had intended to go just to connect more deeply with God myself, but found that there were many who wanted and needed to share on a spiritual level. Thanks, Joy. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's see. There's a question in there somewhere. No, I did not. I did in Spain. I did not celebrate Mass for pilgrims on a regular basis, unless it was being celebrated in the town. Sometimes I was just in the pews with my friends, and once in a while I would go and concelebrate. Again, those were not decisions, just sort of like, I was feeling my way through it as I went along. If I did it now, I might do it differently. Yeah. I didn't bring a mass kit with my own little package of hosts and wine and stuff. Although wine would be easy to get there, but no, I didn't do that.
I think we have a few more minutes. Anybody else want to jump in?
Well, I just want to say this. I watched, and my first time I watched in 2015, I didn't know he was a priest, but anyway, I ended up befriending a fellow pilgrim, and then I found out after a little bit of time that he was a priest. His name is Blaze. I should have known that. But anyway, but he would go into a town because Kevin, as you're talking about, he had his whole, I say kit. I don't know if that's the right, probably not the right word to say, but anyway, he brought his, the kit, and so he would go into a village, and all of a sudden, because we had a priest walking with us on the Camino, I mean, they would ring the bell, and all the village
That's beautiful.
It was amazing. It was just amazing. and it was Father Blaze from Seattle, Washington.
Mhm.
And he would be up there saying in the mass and stuff like that. It was those kinds of things
Hmm.
that are things that stay with you
Hmm.
when you walk the Camino and go there. And so here's this priest, and I have walked with him along the way, and he was walking with his sister as well. And, we were just chatting and all that. And then he's on the altar. And so Kevin, I have to tell you this whole thing, and it's whatever. I mean, but I kept a blog the first year that I walked for my grandchildren and all of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I walked with many priests, but I didn't know they were priests like yourself. And so it's all of a sudden, so I'm in an albergue, and I meet this guy. He's just a guy. And I met this young man, and he was there with his father from Hungary. And so it was just myself and the two of them. We slept in the same room, and we're in albergue, and the bottom bunk, and I'm on the bottom bunk. He's up next, and his father is above. And then, all right, that's it. They didn't speak a bit of English. And then the next day, I'm in the next town, and I go to. They said I heard that there was a pilgrim mass, and I go, and it's the kid. Well, I think he's a kid. He's a young man, but he's a kid to me. But he's a young man, and he is a priest, the
That's
Hungarian.
great.
I'm like, oh my God, I slept next to him. So I kept a blog for my kids. I said, so I slept with a priest last night. My kids loved it. And I had no idea that he was that. We didn't speak the same language, but you know what? We were all connected. It was wonderful. I mean, it was the best experience I ever had in my life.
I think that's one of the, seriously, I think that's one of the common experiences is how even when there's not a common language, somehow you communicate and get along and
Mhm.
find relationships there.
Mm.
So
And he clearly wasn't a snorer, or you would be telling an entirely different
he
story.
wasn't a son. He was too young for that. He was a kid, Like what? It's like my son, It's kind of like
Okay, any more comments or questions, or
Yeah,
no?
I see something about Granyon and Dos Santos are too wonderful. Yes. Yeah.
A couple of years back, I was walking the Primitivo, Kevin, and word filtered along the Pilgrim grapevine that they had to shut Dos Santos. I believe it was Dos Santos, because people weren't giving enough donativo. They weren't giving the money, so they had nothing to feed the people behind them. So just a reminder that, as we always do here, that donativo doesn't mean free. Give what you can. So yeah. Okay. So if we've gone about an hour and 15 minutes, and Kevin's been gracious to, spend that time with us. So if there are no other questions, I will just make a note that we have Peter Monroe, who's going to present on the Via Gebonensis next Monday night. And then the following Monday, we have another priest, Brendan McManus, who's going to call in from Northern Ireland. And he wrote this fabulous guide. Let me see, I'll get it. No. Well, you'll get the email for it. Contemplating the Camino. It's a Ignatian guide. It's Karen turned me on to this, and now we keep copies on hand just to hand to people. It's very thin, just 60 pages, but it's not, it's really, it's a nice dovetail to Kevin's writing, but it's somewhat more practical, but also spiritual as well. So he'll be coming on May 18th. And then I think we might be wrapping up for the summer. These I don't know yet, but we might be. You'll see.
So we're hoping, in the fall, for us Boston people will be, you know, St. Cecilia's. We might be able to meet again and look each other in the face.
Oh, yeah.
How awesome would that be?
There was a lot of talk about Europe opening up. As I said, I've been saying for months that knowing Spain the way I know it, as soon as they can, they're going to open up. As soon as they're able to do it safely. But you should always check with the American embassy to see what's happening there. And if we hear any great news, we'll send it out in an email. But on that
So
note, what?
Right now, it's not open.
You still cannot go between provinces in Spain. So people are coming into the cathedral, but they're walking from somewhere in Galicia.
Hmm.
So you can't. And now I just heard also, wait a minute, very shortly they're opening up the border between Portugal and Galicia.
Hmm.
So I was on a forum. I don't know if it was the Portuguese one or whatever, but they're opening up within the week, I think. Opening up the border, because Portugal's been open for a while. Like it's not like they've shut down, you know, different sections of Portugal, but in Spain, you cannot go between provinces. You're not supposed to. Okay, folks. Well, with that, thank you so much, Kevin.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's been
So
fun
much.
to visit and chat, and imagine Boston. I can't believe it.
So why don't we, we'll make tentative plans to bring you back in the fall after we all read a second book.
Okay, it'd be
How's
great.
that?
Love to. Of
Would you come back for us?
course, of course.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining in. And I love
Thank you all.
Thanks. Okay.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
It's really nice.
Jamie
Thank you.
Thompson. Yep. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're
Cheers.
welcome. Thanks, Kevin.
I usually wait to the end because sometimes there are these questions that are,
Yeah.
no, I think it's good. We're good. All right. You be well, Kevin. Stay well. And
Thank you. Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate it.
yeah, I
Really fun.
appreciate it. All right. Cheers. Bye-bye, love.
Bye-bye.